Today we have Kris Herwig. She is a surgical teaching and training coordinator at Global Surgery Amsterdam, an innovation company making surgery better, safer, and more accessible by innovation in training, treatment strategies, and affordable equipment. Kris is a dear friend of mine who has shared many precious years with me in Amsterdam. She and I have done the school-aged kids phase together at a local Dutch school. These are truly magical and sacred years to every mother, but we did ours in the canals of Amsterdam, riding bikes around like teenagers and in awe of our luck at living with our kids in such an amazing city. Kris and I have spent countless hours chatting over tea and talking about our beautiful children, the highs and lows of international life, and our love of Amsterdam. These types of friendships are so incredibly important in general, but when living abroad, they become your lifeline, and Kris has shaped my Amsterdam life profoundly. When she shared that she and her family were planning to move to her partner's native Sweden, it was a dreaded but not entirely unfamiliar experience. No one is for keeps, at least geographically, in this life of living abroad. I watched her lovingly say goodbye to Amsterdam for months, making it her own kind of sacred. I was lucky enough to be asked to create a ceremony for her going away party, which I was honored to do. We will talk about that and Kris's love and eventual leaving of Amsterdam today. Hi, Kris. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
I was trying not to cry through your intro, which
I
shows.
felt the same way. I was like,
Yeah, but now you're speaking from being a few months removed from having this experience. But I want to start from the beginning. So the beginning of your life being an international person. And so why don't you take us back to your first inkling of knowing you would like to live in a different country? You grew up in the US. You
yeah, I
tell
grew up
everyone.
in the U.S. and I'm originally from Minnesota. And I met my husband, who's Swedish, when we were 18 freshmen at Macalester College in Minnesota. And I think that sometime in the early years of our relationship, like maybe just out of college or something, I had an inkling that maybe we would move abroad, but we didn't know how to make it happen. So we moved around the US a little bit and we lived in Kentucky and we lived in Texas. And eventually he got the opportunity with his company, to move abroad, first to Dusseldorf, Germany. And yeah, I mean, there was nothing to think about. We just did it. I was pregnant with our first son, who we had just before moving. Um, but there was no hesitation. We were really excited to move to Europe and just see what that would have to offer. So we lived in Dusseldorf, Germany, for nearly 3 years, and it was great, and we loved it. Um, and we had sort of made a decision that we weren't looking to be like globe trotting with the company and moving around every couple of years. So we said, like, okay, we're going to stay in Germany until we decide to maybe move to one of our home countries, to the US or to Sweden. And I swear, like a week later, his company was like, what about Amsterdam? And we were like, yeah, what about Amsterdam? Like, that actually sounds amazing. And even though Dusseldorf is really close to Amsterdam, we hadn't spent any time there before. So I had been there once during a layover. Um, and I mean, I loved it, but I was there for just a few hours.
Yeah.
Um,
And how did you feel? I don't want to interrupt you, but I want you to describe, like, you in Dusseldorf, you were pretty right? Like you were learning German a little bit. You were like, I'm going to make this place a home, if not even
yeah,
my permanent home. So you were kind of like settling in a little bit.
yeah, no, absolutely. We were settling in. We had friends, but I will tell you a funny story, because before moving abroad to Germany, I didn't know people who had lived abroad. I didn't know these expat people. Like, I know they existed, but I didn't know them personally. So my idea was to move to Germany and with a newborn, and just, fit right in, learn German, integrate completely. That was seemed very reasonable. Um, so I got there, and it must have been 8 weeks later. I was with my son out on the street in his stroller, and there was a couple speaking English with their son in a stroller, and I was like, "Oh my god, I think I need to talk to them." And then they crossed the street, and I was like, "Okay, this is like, I have to go all in. I'm kind of stalking them now if I start following them." And then they go down like a side street, and I was just like, okay, like just following them. And they stopped to check the baby or something. And I was like, oh, excuse me. Like, I just moved here and whatever. And they were like, oh my God, yeah, like we're American. And, but we're moving back to the US in 2 weeks. And I was like, no. But they said I could have all their friends. So it was back when it was everything still like a little email group of all these moms and dads that would hang out together. So I found my people there and I realized quickly that that's what you need. So you can integrate however you want as well. You can learn the language and be friends with people, but you still need people who know what it's like to not be from that place, who know what it's like to raise kids and just, I don't know, find a dentist and like all these things that like seem super easy but are really hard when you're living abroad. So I did have some experience um, under my belt at that point, but I also knew that Germany wasn't permanent, so that move wasn't too hard. And honestly, it's like 2 hours from Amsterdam, so that
Yeah.
also felt nice because it wasn't like leaving everything really far behind.
Yeah.
Um,
So when the move to Amsterdam, when the opportunity in Amsterdam came up, you're like, oh, that's not so far. I can still see my friends. Yeah, the connection didn't feel like a big leap. Okay. So when you came to visit, so your partner had a opportunity to move here for his job, and you came to visit for the first time, and you're like, oh, what was that like?
yeah, I mean, it was just, love at first sight. It just felt like it was a place for me. Like I loved living in Dusseldorf and it was a great place. But when I rolled up in Amsterdam, I was like, everyone driving around in the Bakfiets, like the bike with the big box in front and with their kids in it. And I was like, oh, this is the mom I've always wanted to be. I might not have known it, but this is me. Um, so yeah, I really liked it. It's such a small city. Everyone was moving around on bikes, and I love to be outdoors. And it's a sort of like city outdoor life that I thought vibed very well with me.
Yeah. And at that time you had one, well, I guess a 5-year-old. Is that
Yeah, I know. I
what we
had
find it?
a 3-year old
Ah,
right,
okay.
right when we moved. He just I think maybe a week or less before we moved, he turned 3, and about a week after we got there, I got pregnant with our second.
Oh, wow. So you were really just kind of living your life, and then the location didn't really bother your plans, which is great.
Yeah, kept going.
Yeah, cool. So when you moved to Amsterdam, how did you choose? Like you had obviously had one experience moving from your home country to Germany. So what changed in your decision making at that point? Or it did anything?
You mean in our decision to move to Amsterdam?
To Amsterdam, where you would live, how you
Yeah.
would start.
I think that we. I remember one of my friends giving me some good advice about because she was moving to a new place, and she was like, "I when I first moved there, I want to be really happy where I live. So I want to live kind of in the middle and make sure that the place I'm living is a place that makes me really happy." So we got there and we started looking around, and my husband wanted a parking spot, which really limits where you can live in
Yeah.
Amsterdam because there's
Yeah.
like 7-year wait lists and stuff. So we looked around and everything was in a certain area called Old South, which is a really nice area. One apartment was in the center and it had a parking spot. And our realtor who took us around was like, yeah, you guys should live here. This is awesome. Like, you don't often get this. And we thought, oh, it's not, yeah, it's great. If we have more kids or if we can always move in 2 years, which I don't know why people say that because moving sucks so bad, but in your head, it's how you sort of justify things.
Yeah.
So we moved
Temporary
in,
decisions. Temporary decisions need some sort of assurance.
something. And so we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the center of the city, right in the Canal District, and it really was the best decision that we made.
Yeah. Yeah, and immediately you probably had to start thinking about schools or did you? Or were you prepared for
Yeah,
that?
I was not prepared for that because every country has such a different school system. So it is. Um, and it was my first child, so he was just turned 3. So school seemed like nothing on the horizon. But it turns out in the Netherlands, from the age of 4, they go to school, and actually the day after they turn 4, they go to school. Um, so I had to start looking, and I was already behind, and I had already missed deadlines at some schools. So that was, yeah, definitely a little bit stressful. But we just wanted the closest school. We were, definitely at that time thought we're not sure, we won't be here very long probably. We want our kid to experience the local culture, and for us, we also see it as a huge advantage um, to integrate yourself into your local community by going to the local school. Then the kids in the street go to the school, your neighbors and all the families around you are part of that community. So that's how we chose the school that we sent our kids to, and you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great and I think that's very but so it's kind of American in the age we grew up in where you would just go to your neighborhood school, but also there's a large network of international schools here that you very easily could have, not large, but for the size of the city there was sometimes that's the obvious choice for people who don't know if how long they're going to be. And so it really comes down to kind of a values move, and it does put a lot of, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's a little bit of a strain on your kids to learn a language that will pay off, And so did you see it that way at the time, or were you just like, sweet, another, like he was already exposed to
Swedish and
English,
German and
and
English.
English? Yeah.
He was a really, yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't say he spoke German, but he probably understood quite a lot. At that point, he just wasn't much of a talker at age 3. Um, uh, but I don't. To me, it was just. I never thought about it, to be honest. Like international school, I didn't consider it. I do remember my neighbor in Dallas when we lived there. She was from Spain. And when we moved abroad, she was like, don't be those people that, you live abroad and send your kids to an international school. And I will caveat that with, now that I've lived abroad, there are so many reasons to send your kids to whatever school you choose. And it is not so simple, and it doesn't make you a certain kind of person. But I understand what she was saying, and it really stuck with me, so that I was always like, yeah, I mean, we're just going to dive in and see what it takes. And honestly, when they're 4, it's why not? I don't feel like they're going to get behind in something if they're not in an English speaking school. And um, yeah, for us, we had already our home life was already mixed, so it made sense for our school life to be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And when I think a little bit, when you marry someone who and start a family with someone who's from a different country, your mind is already a little bit awakened to different languages and cultures and possibilities and all this stuff. And so that, I think, maybe guided your decisions a little bit as well. Like that's
Yeah,
kind of when you married a Swede,
yeah.
you knew it was a
Well,
possibility.
there's just a lot of kind of mix, but also kind of uncertainty around. Yeah, we didn't know necessarily where we'd live or how the languages would play out in our house and things. So yeah, it felt like
Yeah.
it. And honestly, as an American, I mean, the opportunity to learn languages, like, come on, we just don't have those same opportunities in the U.S. Like, so to immerse yourself like that, it was for
Yeah.
me not a
Seems like a luxury, right?
yeah, an absolute luxury for sure.
Yeah, I feel the same way. But when it came down to it, it was a lot harder to send them to school every day in a language. So yeah, it's. I think it's like you said, it's not a simple decision.
Mm-mm.
And so you were here. Your 4-year-old starts going to the local Dutch school, and you start meeting other people. Or is that how did you meet people?
Yeah, it's such a good question actually, because like, not to fast forward, but like, I've moved now to Sweden, and what I've realized is that like I shouldn't, like, it's so hard to move, and I'm looking around going, oh my God, this is hard, and I don't know anyone, and how but I'm comparing it to how I left the Netherlands. And when I look back at how I came to the Netherlands, when my daughter was born, like my like neighbor came, and I think one other neighbor stopped by, and like I didn't know anyone. No one cared that I had a baby in a foreign country. Like I was all alone. Like doing it. So um, I have to remind myself that now at moments. But I would say that, and actually that's another reason to send your kids to the local school, because that's how I met people, was through my son going to school. Um, of course, a lot of Dutch families, but it's Amsterdam. There are people from all over. So even in the classroom, we were meeting families from, you know,
All over the world. Yeah.
everywhere. And then through my daughter as well, as she got older, going to classes. So I think that um, it's such an easy way to meet people when you have young children.
Yeah.
And actually, when you're also a foreigner, because there's just such an immediate connection. You have something in common so quickly. And you
And
understand.
you have space too. You have the same shaped space for each other.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. And that, do you think that was intentional, or do you think you were kind of just playing this by ear? You're just like, I need people, I have kids. Do you think it was an intentional thing, or do you think you were just kind of going with your gut?
I think it became intentional. Like I said, I think like living in Dusseldorf, I had realized what I needed um, was a community of people, and so um, I think I knew. And it's funny because I'm not exactly the most extroverted person. I'm social and everything, but I consider myself more introverted. But I knew that to sort of build a life, you need to find those people um,
Yeah. So you made
around
it your
you.
work to do that.
Yeah, it was definitely my work to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you were in Dusseldorf, that was what, 10, 14 years ago or something.
Yeah.
There wasn't guidebooks about how to be an expat. There wasn't like what there is
No.
now. There wasn't, whatever movies about it or anything. It was just, you're kind of in the frontier of this time. And so that I think is interesting. So you were kind of blazing your own path. And so, yeah, so you've slowly over time built these connections through school, through your neighborhood. Um, and how
Yeah.
would you describe that? Like, how would you, if someone were to beam into your life midway through your Amsterdam journey, um, it feels very much like they would have seen you surrounded by a community of people and having a very like connected life, but in its hybrid way. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to describe it. I mean, I think like halfway through, especially because then I'm a little bit more settled and my kids are slowly, getting a bit older. Like I was learning Dutch. I started speaking Dutch all the time, to my neighbors in the shops and stuff. So I was able to get sort of a conversational level of Dutch going, which is, it also does a lot for the experience of living abroad. Just building community and, yeah, being able to speak the local language in a city where you truly don't need to. I mean, Amsterdam is definitely an English speaking city. Um, and
but
I
it gives
think
you another portal. It gives you another portal for connection. And
it
so yeah, that's what I've noticed is it gives you, instead of just one or a few people you can really connect with, it gives you many more.
absolutely, and people appreciate it. So yeah, I mean it's funny because in a way it's like your conversations are somewhat limited because my vocabulary um, is not the same as it is in English. I can't carry on a conversation in the same level, but I think that by putting forth the effort, people want to also help you out and get you to the next level and share with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you thought maybe at some point we might stay here for longer. Was there
Yeah, I mean,
decision points?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think like halfway through, I sort of thought we were be staying for longer, and as the years went by, I was more convinced. Um, because I just also was like, where are we going to go? The US didn't feel like a good option for me. And moving to Sweden, honestly, I wasn't necessarily thrilled about starting over again. Um, but apparently, we were not on the same page on that one. Um, During COVID, we were driving home from Sweden where we spent a lot of time, and my husband was like, oh, maybe we should consider moving here. And I was like, and he said, yeah, it's not like we're going to raise our kids in the Netherlands. And I was just like, wait, what? I was completely unaware that that was your opinion. And also, they were like 7 and 10 or 8 and 11 or something. I'm like, they're we did raise them. I have been raising them in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that, I don't know how it is for you, but I do think as expats, and especially, when neither of you are from that country, it is, you do always have, there's a door and it's always a bit open, and sometimes it's more open and sometimes it's not, but it's always a bit open. And you know saying forever, yeah, I don't know, it's a hard thing to imagine when you're not from a place. And now, but also once you've been away from a place for so long, you also don't feel like you fit in that place either. So I think that it is this, that's like I think kids are experiencing that. I mean, that's sort of the definition also of their culture, kids, and kind of what they experience. But I think also for adults, we experience that same thing of thinking like, I mean, what would it be like to go back and live in the US? And like, how would I fit in? What would that experience be like for me?
Yeah. I always say that's you become a peregrine. You become an
Yeah.
outsider everywhere. You
Yeah.
suddenly don't fit exactly anywhere. And so that's that sensation that I'm not sure people plan on or can
No.
name, but it seems universal. And so I think you also have experienced that. Um, there's
Yeah.
also a there's also a complication in moving back to where your spouse is from and you're not from there. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing that you are maybe grappling with or did grapple with this decision.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's also interesting because my husband didn't live here for 25 years. So, like, never really as an adult. So, I do wonder what that's like for him. But yeah, we moved back to where he grew up, and all of his high school friends live within 10 minutes from here, and his parents live around here. And um, we live in the suburbs. So, we've traded in 13 years of raising our kids in the center of cities to, um, a yard and um, all these things. So yeah, it's very different. But I do think that the advantage for us, for example, living in the Netherlands, is you're on neutral ground in a way, right? It's not one person's place or the other. Um, and so now, yeah, I'm really the odd one out, and it does have a different feeling. Um, and I don't know yet exactly what that is,
Yeah,
because it hasn't been long enough. But
yeah,
it's
you're reporting live from it
reporting
actually
live,
happening.
exactly. And on the one hand, it's an advantage because, yeah, he knows things about the system and he can read things and all that stuff. But also, honestly, so much has changed even since I first moved abroad. Like, you can just translate every page. It's much easier, anyways, than it used to be. But yeah, so we'll see. But it's definitely a very different dynamic to not be both in a foreign country.
Yeah. And so tell me, let's go back. So tell me, it felt like you didn't have an end date, but suddenly there was an end date that he introduced into your system. And so that we all have those times that some people describe it as like every year we sit down and decide to stay another year. When our visas come up, we make the decision. There's every family, every couple, every individual has their own process of
Sure.
how they decide where to stay, because you do have to make a decision. It's not a passive process. So for you, that was the moment where that there may be another move on the horizon. And
Yeah.
so what did that start making you do, feel, consider?
Yeah, all the feels. I mean, I think you said it very well when you said it's not a passive process, but actually all of our moves had been sort of passive, like as in, oh, there's a job opportunity, let's go. Like, oh, like cool job opportunity, let's go. And now we felt like we were at a point, like my husband stopped working for the company he had been at for a long time. And so we're in the Netherlands. I think it might have still been COVID. It was somewhere in that COVID-y time. We were living in a 2-bedroom apartment with kids who were not happy to be sharing room anymore. And, you know, that was fair. So we knew that we needed to do something. And so it was either, are we going to move and buy a house in the Netherlands? Are we going to move somewhere else? And what does that look like? So we thought like, okay, we're going to be grown-ups now and really make this decision. We were very unhappy. It felt like a lot of pressure because we didn't know. It wasn't like we could sit down and have these. We would like develop point systems. We would like rank places on all these different things, and everything always came out to average like the same. So if something was more expensive, or public transportation or school systems or whatever, it all just sort of came out in the wash. So we were like, how do we do this? And ultimately, really, in a way, it did sort of semi-passive again, just in the sense that my husband looked for work, and he looked both in the Netherlands and in Sweden, only those two places. And he got a really great job opportunity in Sweden. And so suddenly that was it. He was like, I got a job offer. And it was like, okay,
Yeah,
starting in
but
a
that,
month.
yeah,
Okay.
starting in a month. But that process, as I was kind of there for it, it was a
Hmm.
kind of like more like a year process.
Oh yeah, no, I know. Yeah, you were there for it, and I apologize because I came over and had the same conversation like every week. I was like,
No,
"Oh, what are we gonna do?"
don't apologize. It is, living intentionally is actually a lot of work,
Yeah,
and making considered decisions and not just going with whatever is presented with you
yeah,
for you is a lot of work, and it does take a lot of consideration and conversations and whatever you need. And I think that what I was grateful, because I've had other friends just not share it,
mm,
and they just disappear. They sometimes
yeah,
move the next week, they sometimes move overnight. And so I think I've done it enough times that I wanted to be part of your process, because I was already part of your life. And so
yeah,
this is part of your life. And so I wanted to be part of it. So I think that that's just part of it. And just part of this life of intentionally living in a place for as long as it suits you. And then you have to find a process around that. Um, and it's a multidimensional process, especially when you have a partner and children. And as
yeah,
you know, you had to go through every layer of what that is. What's best for the kids, what's best for me, what's best for us, what is our long-term goal, does this fit it,
yeah,
is this our final resting place, is it not? And
yeah.
so this is a big decision that most people, as we say, don't make.
No,
So
definitely not.
it's, yeah.
I think that like, especially when you compare it to other times that we moved, like the added dimension of our children being older. Like the last time we moved, I had a son who was 3, and now I had 2 kids who were 9 and, well, when we moved, 9 and 13. Um, and that's really different. And I will say that I went out and bought this book, Third Culture Kids, which is really ironic because all along I had these third culture kids, but this move felt different. Like it felt like I was doing something so different because it, like, I don't know, they had been so young in the beginning. I hadn't thought about it in the same way. So I was actually still learning a lot. And I made the mistake of I just looked in the index under moving, and under moving, it had different like sub categories. And the first one was like adolescence. So I'm like, all right. So I go to um, uh, moving adolescence, and it was like, oh, like from the age of 13, like moving can cause like all of these like negative effects and blah 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 and increased risk of all these things. And I was like, oh dear God, what like what? Of course it said like you can still do it, but it was like all these things to think about, which was very daunting, but also, I mean, honestly, good to know, right? So that you're considering all of these different things. Um, and so, yeah, I think moving, considering the kids was really hard. I had a moment where I told Martin we couldn't move because I was too stressed about the kids. Um, and in particular, my daughter, who's, yeah, a bit anxious and doesn't deal with change that well. Um, but then actually, we visited Sweden for a week last fall. And then I reversed it and said, look, you know what? She'll be fine. If we're with her, she'll be fine. And I don't want, her like, that is not how I should be making a decision. Like we talk about it as a family, and it was maybe not their biggest wish to move, um, but I realized that if we were together, we could always make it work. So
Yeah. Yeah. And you're still, I think in a way that is part of the difference of living this way, is your family really is your home. So home
mm,
is wherever you are. And that is a new idea that we're all kind of having to grapple with, I think. that home there, they'll have multiple homes, right? Amsterdam will always feel like a home to them, even if they move back or they never come back. And so, but it can't be their only home. It can't be their only safe place. And in a way, we're all raised to think that that's really important, and it is. So you're in a way compensating or doing this extra layer of support to make home clear to them in other ways. So yeah, that's really cool. So you're in the middle of this move, and you have to at some point make it make sense to yourself as well. I think once you have all the bases covered, okay, maybe it looks like schools might work out, houses might work out, all the logistics, but then there's the layer that sometimes gets missed that I think you did a really good job of um, recognizing what you were going through while you're going through it. And so tell me how you cared for that process.
I know that at some point, I don't remember like when, but years before I'd been like, oh my God, like I think maybe it's also like you say, you have people you in your life, you have people leaving, and sometimes people would leave like relatively quickly. And I was always like, oh, like if I have to leave Amsterdam, like I need like a long goodbye. Even though it's actually also a little bit painful, but I was like, I just love Amsterdam so much that I knew I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't just get on a flight and be like, well, that was a fun chapter and let's go see what's next. Um,
Because I
and
want to be
so,
clear, like, I just want to take a second to just describe quickly what it's like to be a parent in Amsterdam. If we
hmm,
can spend like 5 minutes relishing in how beautiful that is, to
oh,
be an international in the center of Amsterdam, just you're riding your bikes to pick up your kids. Like, tell me your favorite parts.
I mean, my favorite parts are definitely getting on my bike every day. I loved, like in the US or in a car culture, it's like if your kids are in the car, they might, talk and open up a little more. But it's the same thing on a bike. So when they're in the bakfiets, you're outside, wind in your face, you're moving your body, and your kids are chatting about their day or whatever. And I also and I love the fact that then you're outside because I love that if I went to the grocery store, if I had to run an errand, if I needed new shoes, if I did anything, I went there on my bike, and it makes that whole like you know horribly monotonous task of daily chores much more enjoyable when you can get out and enjoy a little. Okay, when it's raining, a bit less enjoyable, but you know, come. We're gonna
You
pretend it
don't,
never happens in Amsterdam.
it never rains
It
here.
never rains there. And then also, I think the other sacred thing that I loved was the community, and really like that physical neighborhood that I lived in, which includes like the school, um, which is also a very hands-on place, and parents pick up and drop off their kids, so you really see people. And I mean, I don't think you can go to the grocery store without seeing someone you know. You can't really walk down the street without seeing people you know. And same over time, I knew so many people on my street, and eventually it was also the people who didn't have kids because first all the families, but we and I never lived in a city before moving to Europe, and so also just this different way of living where you all live so close together and you find ways to make it work. And we would sit out on our in front of our building and have drinks with all the neighbors, just everyone bring over a beer and bring a chair out and hang out. And that's how I got to know so many people. Was just out there on the street on the corner. You recognize them, you say hi, um, and that's I think that's actually how I built my community over time.
Yeah, you're
Well,
part of each other's life. You're part
yeah,
of
you're
each
just
other's, yeah.
yeah,
Even passively, they're part of the story of your life.
yeah. And those ones are actually that can be a hard group when you're moving. That sort of those passive people that are like sometimes you don't even know their name, but you see them and you talk to them and they comment on how the kids have grown or whatever, because you've been around each other because you live so close together for
Hmm.
so long. So that's the yeah. I mean, Amsterdam city center life is totally idyllic.
Yeah, it's idyllic, and it's also I think people describe it as a village, and it
Mm,
very much is. But in the village, I think when you're an international person, you are in a way disturbing the or living on a different plane sometimes than the rest of the village. And so you make your own kind of village within a village. And that is what you have different parts of your day, but also this part of this village of international people, I think is really, or at least people who understand or celebrate what you're doing with your life, is really rich. It's like a family. And so
mhm.
tell me a little bit about how you prepared to say goodbye to all of those dimensions.
Well, I knew that I wanted to say goodbye to a lot of things, like to places, to like, to little shops that I would frequent, like to all these places that had just like been part of this fabric of my life there. So I had this idea and I contacted my friend, neighbor, local artist. Um, she's originally from China, and she does all these beautiful like watercolor paintings. And so she has. I went over to her house and said, "I can I buy 100 postcards, just different ones." And I told her what it was for, and we were crying. She was like, "Oh, I'm so happy that you want to do this." And I was like, I want to. I explained to her that what I wanted to do was I wanted to use these postcards to say goodbye. So again, to a local business, it's not that they know who I am, it's that I want to say goodbye, right? So, um, and also to like even just leave them at certain spots, like places that have been sacred to me. It's my way of like going to a space and being able to sort of say like, thank you for what you gave me. I appreciate it. So that can be a playground or, you know, a bench that I always stopped at and all these places. And so I I started doing that over time slowly. Even some I would just take the postcards and start writing like the person or the place on it just to keep track of who I wanted them to go to.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was a big part of it, and I did that over months. Um, uh, Really, and sometimes felt a bit silly because for example, I went to like the cheese shop that I always went to. I don't even know what it's called, to be honest.
Yeah. It's the place around the corner.
Yeah, the place. And, I said, oh, like this feels a little silly. And I was like, but this is my last time in buying cheese because I'm moving to Sweden. And I just, I was like, thank you. Like, you guys are always really friendly and you tolerate my Dutch. I always spoke Dutch with them and they recognize me, but of course you don't know each other exactly. And they were like, oh, it's super nice. And that was also really nice because anytime I had an interaction where I actually gave it to someone, the interaction was really meaningful because, you know, they got to respond and say like, wow, thank you so much. But just send us a message if you ever want us to ship you something or, this and that. Like, and it helped with closure. It just helped to not feel like everything just fell off because I think in a city you have so many little relationships. It's
Hmm.
not just like going to whatever, like the big mega grocery store and like having no connection with anything. It was like you bought bread somewhere, you bought, cheese somewhere, like you name it. You can get your eggs somewhere else and you're like, so it
Yeah.
was a lot of relationships to try to
Uh,
address.
yeah. Honor. It's like you were honoring
Honor.
them and also honoring your goodbye to it and the meaning it had in your life. Because if we take a look at how you won't get the little kid years back and you spent them
Mhm.
here. And so it's
Mhm.
really nice to acknowledge and put them in their sacred place, I think. So it's really nice. So why 100? Why did you choose 100?
I don't know. I just wanted a bunch. I didn't want to have to revisit it or try and count. So I didn't make a list. I didn't know for sure, but I just thought um, I'll start with this. And I have a few left, but I used most of them.
Yeah, cool. And so that was one of your like you didn't tell anyone, you kind of just made it for yourself. Like this is
Yeah,
what I'll do to say
yeah,
goodbye to my Amsterdam, whatever that means, because
yeah,
everyone's city is different. It has different layers and
totally.
personalities. I say they're characters in my story.
Yeah. No, I mean that's actually a really good description. I always feel like leaving Amsterdam is like, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, losing a limb, or like it's a lover where I'm like, it's not you, it's me. Like,
Mm.
and you walk away going like, oh my God, what could have been? But yeah,
It's time to move on.
but I had to move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And to do that and leave it better than you found it and honor it is actually a really good lesson for all relationships, if not just a
It's
relationship with the city.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, with my friends, I had a lot of trouble with this because I actually, I don't like to have a big party, and I don't like to really organize those types of things myself. And then I thought, like, what should I do? Should we do something for all the families and then invite everyone to go to, like, spend the day in the park or whatever, big picnic? And but my husband was traveling still a lot, and it was a lot of work, and no one seemed interested. I mean, as in my family, everyone was kind of like, oh, I don't know, teenager, like, ah. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do myself then. So I was like, you know, decided on a group of my women friends that I wanted to be a part of it. And then you and another friend of ours, Rachel, helped put something together. Like I said, because I didn't want to, like, organize. I think it's just kind of hard sometimes to throw a party for yourself.
Yes.
So I was like,
Especially when
okay,
there's so many people around who want to celebrate you. But it was a matter of figuring out what you really wanted, right?
yeah, yeah. And then, so I, and then what I did for that, just back to,
And
like,
if I can interrupt you,
yeah,
when you have a baby in your culture, there's a baby shower, or
mm-hmm,
there's no precedence for this. It's not like everyone's like, well, when I was moving to another country, no one sits you down and goes, this is how you
yeah,
should go. So you really did have to dig deep, figure out what it is you wanted, and
yeah.
that is super. I mean, it was a process, I think.
It was a process. And then
Yeah.
you reached out and asked if, like, if anyone was kind of organizing something, um, like, kind of ceremonial around my leaving. And I was like, no, please do. Like, as in, also, it felt it, but it was something that I wanted, but I also didn't know how to ask for it. Like, because you can just have a going away party and everyone can hang out and have some drinks and go home. But it feels like in that something is missing, because
Mm.
again, you have to figure out how to recognize that moment, how to honor those experiences and those relationships. And so you said, okay, I got this. And I was like, all right, good. And then I think the night before or something, or the week before, you asked me, like, what is one of your, like, favorite places, or most important places for you in Amsterdam? And I kind of wrote a little rambling thing about these different places that were sacred, largely having to do with kind of, my kids, because I can't really turn a corner and not remember one of my kids, on a bike, or, just running around. So I gave you a few ideas. And then when we had a party that evening, we all got on our bikes, left the venue, which I loved because we were all on our bikes, a group of like 13 women. And we went to this place, which was just a corner that I had mentioned as being important, because it was a corner where I always met people. It was like on my way home from when we dropped the kids off, my friend Bettina and I would end up sitting and chatting for, I mean, sometimes half an hour, this or that. And it was just where I always ran into people. So it's a place where I've had a lot of really important conversations, and it's just a corner. And um, so we got there, and you had created this beautiful ceremony. Can I tell everyone about it?
Yeah, please.
Um, so I guess when everyone came to the party initially, you had bought these, like, twin stones, so like different sets of stones, and everyone could go in and they could pick which stones that they wanted, and they put them in their pocket for later. So when we got to the corner, everyone had these stones in their pocket. I was not aware of this. And
There's someone screaming outside. Don't worry. Just
oh,
ignore.
city life.
Amsterdam's coming into our conversation.
And so you prepared this, like, beautiful introduction. And then the idea was that everyone could would sort of say something to me about like our relationship and what it's meant, and then they would give me one of their stones, and they would keep a stone so that we had this connection. And I have to say, it was everything I could have asked for, and so beautiful. And it was exactly what I'm saying. If you just have a going away party, people would never have said the things that they said to me, and they're so meaningful. And in that moment, like, I deepened all of those friendships so much. And and I feel like it did what it was supposed to do. Like, it created some sort of closure, but also actually left everything wide open, as in those friendships are just there and even more there. um and it was honestly a little bit like being at your own funeral. Like, why don't we talk like this to people more often? Why don't we say these things? It was
Yeah.
just, friends that I had known almost the entire time that we raised our after my daughter was born together, and just hearing, you know, the important roles we've had in each other's lives was just, it was really, really beautiful and sacred. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity, because I think I was just trying to make sense of how I could help you through what you were doing. And we don't have a language around it. Like, I
No.
remember planning my sister's baby shower and stuff. You're like, what do you want for decorations? What do you want for la, 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 or a wedding? But this, it was just totally, we were totally feeling our way about how, because we all knew for a long time, we knew it was
Yeah.
coming. And then, you had to feel your way into what would mean the most to you, right? Because I've been to parties where people are at a park all day and we all bring our kids and we drink and
Yeah.
it's great. And that's maybe what they want. But for this, you really wanted something a little bit more sacred. But also, there's this tradition of touchstones that I have been enamored with, that I brought into it, because it really is, sometimes you need to have a connection with someone, and they're sometimes an ocean away. And that's not always the case with people you're that close to. And so that's something very unique about living in different places and connecting with people so deeply, because you are connecting like family, that I really wanted you and us to all have access to somehow. Um, and we were all, well, first of all, I told everyone they didn't have to speak. They could write you a letter instead, but everyone ended up speaking. And we were all just in tears. It was
Yeah.
very, very fun.
Yeah.
On the corner,
On the
13
corner.
very, yeah, some of our kids walked by. We're all on
Yeah.
bikes. It was really lovely. And it really encapsulated what life is like as an adult here, I think,
Mm-hmm.
as a international person. But also, there were Dutchies with us too, so they're
Yeah.
also experiencing. They're part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it was lovely, yeah. And I love it doing it, and I hope other people will consider how they want to honor their
I
time.
mean, I think it's so important. And then also, like, I didn't know you were going to do that. And I had these little plates made for
Yeah,
everyone that say fika on it. And fika is like the Swedish kind of coffee and cake hour. Like, do you want a fika? Let's have fika. And I had it made by this local artist that I had come across years before. And she just makes little ceramic things, and I love it. And so I've loyally bought lots of gifts from her over the years, and especially as people are leaving, she's got lots of cute little Amsterdam things. And so um, I went back to her, and that also ended up being super meaningful because she knows me in this way of, I will come in every once in a while and be like, oh, we chat, and then she was really honored to kind of be a part of it and was so sweet about it. So everything had such a um, I don't know, everything has such really good vibes to it. And I'm
yeah.
not saying it
So
made it easier to leave, because it still was really, really hard, but
yeah,
it was the kind of send off that I think people should have and try to create for themselves. Not that it's easy to do, but it's important.
yeah, yeah. And I think that we talked a lot about leaving somewhere so you could arrive in your new home, not clean, but like ready. So we were almost like preparing you for your next phase, right? And
Yeah.
so that, I think, it is something sometimes we miss in our culture at large, but especially, we know how to do weddings again, funerals, baby showers, whatever it is in your culture. We don't know how to do this. And so I really welcomed, and I was really proud of you for how you went through it. And and now you're on to your new. So I want to hear. So we sent you off. You drove to Sweden, and
Mm,
then like went dark for a while, which everyone
mm,
does with the new life and moving. And you went back to the U.S. for the summer, and then you arrived back in your new reality in Sweden.
yeah.
So how has that transition been?
I mean, it's it's definitely still a transition, I would say. Overall it's been good. I have to say, when I was in the US and we were getting like ready to leave, my mind kept going to Amsterdam, like, oh, we're going home. And like I had to keep shifting to like, no, that's not home. That's not home. We're going to Sweden now. Um, but it's nice. The kids are doing really well in school. Like, not that there aren't challenges, but I would say everything is going pretty well. Um, it snowed earlier today, so that's a reality that I'm gonna have to get used to. And people keep saying, "Oh, like we're getting ready for winter. We're preparing for winter." And I think I need to ask someone what that means, because I'm like, well, what do you do besides turn on the heat and get out your sweaters? Like, I don't know. Like, living in the center of a city in an apartment building, obviously also much less wintry in Amsterdam. I'm just not even sure what it means now that I have a whole yard and garden. But I'm hoping it'll all just work out and be fine. But I'm enjoying nature. We live a little bit outside of the city, and I've also quickly discovered that it is really easy to get to the city. It's like 19 minutes by train, um, and I've been going in not so often, but also I've been trying to give myself permission to be like, just go and run a few errands in the city, even if you don't have to. Because my alternative, if I'm honest, is the mall. Like, think
Yeah.
US shopping mall.
Oh
And
no.
that place does not make me very happy. It's convenient and all those things, but I would rather go to the city to go to the same stores. It's not always as convenient, but so
Yeah.
there are a lot of it's I'm adjusting to two different countries, but also two different ways of living in terms of like city and like outside of the city. Um, so yeah, that's really challenging, and it's also hard to separate. So when people are like, "Oh, what's it like? What's Sweden like? Or what are Swedes like?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's all mixed up in there. I don't know yet."
Yeah. What is your Sweden like is what you're trying to define, right? And what you want
Exactly.
it to be. And what this
Yeah.
chapter means to you. And while you're doing
Mm.
it, it's really hard. But your best laid plans for how the kids landed and everything have worked out. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I think as mothers, even we're like, oh, we never get to ourselves, so we never have to. And so you're definitely feeling the vulnerability of that, I think.
Absolutely. And I will say one thing that someone said to me when we were in this process, it honestly could have been you. I don't remember, but I was so consumed with this idea of like when we were deciding if we should move. And this was kind of like even before the job offer, I was just like, what should we consider? Like all these things. And I was really obsessed with this idea of like creating our forever home. Like wherever we move, this is it, last stop. Cause I don't want to do it to my kids. I want to, especially as they're older, I want them to like, whatever. But someone said, well, it doesn't have to be permanent. And I was just like, you can always move if it doesn't, go well or something. And I was just like, oh, yeah. So giving myself permission, and I'm not saying that we would, but even just this idea of forever, like my kids can finish high school here and then who knows, like they're global citizens. Like, are they actually going to live in Sweden for the rest of their lives? Maybe, but probably not.
Hmm.
So that also doesn't make me feel like I have to live in Sweden for the rest of my life. Maybe it's just a chapter, like you
Yeah.
say. And I sort of thought it was the ending, which is ridiculous because there's
Yeah.
so much left of life to live. But you have these moments and you put this pressure on yourself.
Yep.
And I think I was doing that. Um, and I think maybe it's also a bit easier to just say, like, this is this chapter and I will live in the now. For now, I can live in it. And then, you know, we'll see what the next 10 years bring. And
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I think that's a little bit, when I hear that voice coming out, I always think, well, that's my I have to grow up voice.
mm,
And I feel like I live in a never ending adolescence being abroad, making new friends, having new experiences, growing. in ways I probably wouldn't. I mean, riding bikes around the city does not help that feeling of not being an adult. So, but do you think allowing yourself to be more in that space instead of the serious, buckle down, be adults forever, we have to be solid? Do you think
Yeah,
it's part of it?
I think so, but I'm also trying to figure out if part of that feeling, or it's easier maybe to access that feeling in the city because you're surrounded by these people. Like, when you live like kind of out in the suburbs where I do, it's like every interaction has to be so much more intentional in a way. Like,
Mm.
whereas I feel like in a city, it's not like that. Like, I was at the mall and the woman in front of me was definitely
You,
American.
you
And
say it mall.
the mall. Um, and this woman in front of me was so American, and I could tell. And she had her daughter, like probably college age daughter, with her. And it's funny because of course my kids were like, "No, don't say anything," and I didn't. It also felt different though. Like at the mall, it felt so whatever. And afterwards, I sort of regretted it because I'm like, how am I going to meet people? Like, I know there are ways. I've thought about just hanging out at Costco all the time because there's a Costco here. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could find some good people there. But yeah, it's different. Yeah, you just you don't see people the same way you do in a city. Even though it's also funny because you can live on the same street as someone for a really long time and also have no idea. So in that sense, you also don't see people, but you're surrounded by people all the time in a city, whether or not you know them or you don't know them. They're just physically there, and so I feel that like absence now. Like I'm just like I think these people who live across the street, I've never seen them. I go up and say hi if I see neighbors. Like I'm just like, oh hi, like we moved in, and I haven't seen them in 5 months or something because they're
Wow.
inside. They're in their house.
Yeah.
So
How dare they? No, I'm kidding.
I know,
Well, you don't have that luxury in Amsterdam because you have to go out. Yeah, so it's a new frontier of connection for you and
definitely.
figuring out how to find your new tribe, your Swedish, I guess, cohort of people.
Yeah,
Um,
but
yeah,
for
but
now,
we've
I
also,
will taking visitors. So that also
yeah, we're coming. The whole Weber clan
see,
is coming to visit you at some point.
and that's the advantage. We have space.
That's right. But also, whenever someone leaves, I always think, after I get over the shock, it's always like a new place to visit. So it's
Absolutely.
the bonds don't go away; they just become farther away. And so
Yeah,
that's definitely where you sit in our group, our Amsterdam collective, but also in my life is you're just not so far away, and I get to visit Sweden, which I've never been to. So
yeah, absolutely. We can't wait.
yeah, good. Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. We've talked about it so many times. It feels good to get it recorded somehow. And
Yeah,
I hope that people listening will consider how they can make their time more sacred. And not just when they're leaving or coming, but that too. But also the time abroad is sacred, but also even if you're not living abroad, it is. But this life just makes it more in your face. So
I agree.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully we can learn something. And I know we're going to start offering the ceremony you helped me make in House of Peregrine. We'll start offering that to people, a custom ceremony for leaving. Um, and thanks for helping me bring that to life.
Oh, it's magical. Thank you.
All right, Kris, we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Bye.